Hi there and welcome to this Verse Online video all about creating believable villains for your RPG. Now this is kind of system agnostic, so we're not talking about Pathfinder or D&D or anything like that. What I'm going to talk about here should be relevant to whatever system that you play in. So the basic theory that I'm going to put across is that any villain will not consider themselves to be particularly villainous, and that evil, when you're in any kind of remotely believable narrative, is a relative value. Okay, certainly some of the things I'm going to talk about can obviously just be classed as evil acts, but the perpetrators of the acts won't generally think in that kind of classical haha, cackling, rubbing hands villain kind of way, that they're doing anything particularly wrong at all. Some of the villains I'm going to talk about take actions which are, even by their estimation, extreme, and involve the loss of life of others, of innocent life, but they view their actions as justified, as necessary, and as essential to their view of the world continuing, and their view of the world and sustaining itself. So what does all this mean? Okay, well let's begin and look at the kind of the unbelievable or the unrealistic villain archetype. And the unrealistic villain, the one that's hard for any human being to relate to, and this isn't necessarily a bad villain, but we'll cover that in a little bit. But this kind of villain is the one that sees evil as an end in itself, and they're not really trying to do anything more than commit evil acts. Some kind of demonic possession. If you look at the Exorcist, there's sort of little rhyme nor reason to the demon that possesses the little girl in The Exorcist, other than simply to control. It has no other motivation that we're aware of. Perhaps there's a huge complex back history to the demon, which means it's interested in escaping from hell for particular reasons. But we don't know that. Perhaps if there is a kind of a backstory that is there, you can add in the comments below. But for most villains, the backstory is really important in understanding motivation. Now, the most kind of important and interesting cinematic villain that has come along in the past 10 years has obviously been Thanos in the MCU. And Thanos, again, is a classic example of the villain that doesn't see himself as the villain. When Thanos eventually explains during Infinity War why it is necessary for him to do what he does, then his rationale becomes clear. Now, what's the point in this? Why not just have a villain who goes around doing bad things and keeps his motivations to himself? Well, it makes for a much weaker story. It makes for a much weaker character, and it means that the heroes find it more difficult to interplay with the villain. So how could you transpose this into D&D? Okay, so imagine that you have a Thanos-like character, a character who believes that they must do something drastic and extremely brutal in the interests of the greater good, as they see it, which is the important bit, the greater good as they see it. The PCs, part of the kind of the enjoyment of the adventure is to work out the villain's motivation. And in working out the villain's motivation, that might provide the PCs with key clues as to how to defeat the villain. Or they might have a dialogue with the villain, trying to fathom how they could be so destructive and so brutal. They might even decide that the villain whilst they are entirely monstrous and destructive in what they're doing, has some sort of grievance, some sort of thing that, you know, had gone wrong in the past. This kind of brutal kind of utilitarianism, this idea that it's better to do the thing that will provide the greatest good to the greatest number than to allow the universe to limp along in its own random, chaotic form, is something that we've seen throughout the 20th century, throughout this kind of age of ideologies that we've lived through and kind of still live through. The idea that a large number of people should die in the interests of an imagined greater good, a utopia that is coming, is really the kind of the justification for Nazism, for Maoism and Stalinism, and for Cambodia's killing fields. That the future that will be built on this kind of mountain of destruction will be a magnificent one, and that the price paid by everybody else in the present is ultimately worth it. That kind of utopian villain is a really, really useful one to work with, and one that you can easily employ. You simply think, what is the long-term outcome of what they're trying to achieve? Are they trying to create a new sort of kingdom, or a new kind of reality, a new sort of dimension? Are they hoping to right some ancient wrong? If you look at there's some real world examples of the righting of supposed wrongs. Part of the appeal of the Nazis in the 1930s to many ordinary Germans was the idea that Germany had been treated very unfairly at the end of the First World War, and that this great wrong of the Treaty of Versailles must be overturned. That's one powerful motivation of creating this villain that believes they have some sort of moral justification. The other thing a villain might be trying to achieve, and that Hitler was trying to achieve, is this kind of restorationism. The idea that the nation, the kingdom, the Reich that the villain rules has gone to the dogs, really. It's gone into terrible decline, and a previous golden age must be restored. There are all sorts of examples in cinema of villains who are reaching into this previous golden age, which obviously not particularly golden. One of the unspoken bits in Star Wars is the motivations of Darth Vader. Now, the Emperor, who is the master of the dark side of the Force, both him and Darth Vader view the dark side of the Force as a very useful and powerful tool. Darth Vader tells Luke Skywalker that he must appreciate the power of the dark side, and the subtext of that is, well, to do what? And Darth Vader is all about restoring order to the galaxy. He has a motivation which he, in his view, believes is the right one. Obviously, his methods of blowing up Alderaan are not particularly pleasant, and not something any right-thinking person would advocate. But he thinks, well, much as with Thanos, if this has to be done in order to achieve the greater good, the greater goal, then fine. The appeal of the dark side of the Force is that it's, I guess, arguably better for this process to occur than the light side of the Force, and the overall goal is to create an ordered galaxy under the Empire, something that the Republic appears to have failed in, partly because of the civil war created by Darth Sidious, but there you go. So here, I guess the takeaway tip for today is make sure that there is an underlying logic to your villain's goals. even in Christopher Nolan's Batman, the Joker has an underlying logic. He appears to be utter chaos, and his only motivation is to kill Batman. But he says he has this view which you could call Manichaean, which is where light pitches itself against dark, good pitches itself against evil, and chaos pitches itself against order. And he says simply to Batman, without you, there can be no me. And if you exist, I have to exist. You are order, I am chaos, and that's how it goes. And to him, everything else is simply a game that must be played out, which makes him a wonderful villain, and in some ways scarier than Thanos because he's more unpredictable, and there is kind of even less reasoning with him than that. So make sure your villain has an underlying logic, even if it's a monstrous logic. There has to be some kind of system of thought there that you can base a character around. And as we'll see in later videos, what we're really interested in here is character development. Just as in a great novel, you need to have a plot that makes sense and believable characters, so too that has to happen in role-play games. Thanks very much, and do check out our website. Go to www.verserpg.online, subscribe to this channel, and we'll be giving you plenty more cool content to come. All the best. Bye-bye.